Are you new to gardening? Are you wondering whether to side shoot your tomatoes or not? Well, there are two kinds of tomatoes. So this is like a traditional tomato, so it's supposed to grow tall and thin and have trusses off the side. And it should look a little bit like that. But quite often it looks like this. So, as soon as you turn your back on them, they produce loads and loads of side shoots. And you need to do something about it. So this is a tomato that you would need to side shoot. And this is your traditional kind, like a money maker or a Shirley or a cherry tomato. But there is another kind of tomato which is really easy to grow. That's called a determinate tomato. So you buy that as a hanging basket or a bush. So this is a hanging basket tomato. No need to side shoot or do anything to it. Thing is, if you look at the amount of flowers on it, this is going to flower and fruit miles ahead of any of your cordon tomatoes. So if you're new to gardening, perhaps the best one to start with is a hanging basket. It flowers and fruits really quickly. The second one is the bush tomato. So this is still determinate. There's no need to side shoot this tomato. So we grow it in a pot with 3 canes just to support it. You will need to support a bush tomato. It can't just grow on its own. So either 1 cane or a tripod of canes is enough to support the stems as they grow. Again, no side shooting. And it has flowers and fruit already. So these are the easiest tomatoes to grow. These are our determinate, or bush, or hanging basket, or tumbling tomatoes. So what makes them determinate? I think the thing is, try and remember it as they're determined to flower. So you can actually see on this plant here that every shoot ends in a flower. It doesn't produce leaves. At the end of every shoot, it just turns into a flower. So the plant, as it grows, just produces more and more flowers. So that means it's determined to flower. That's what makes it determinate. There is no need to side shoot these because it produces very few side shoots that don't end up immediately in flowers. So even in the determinate group, there are some differences. So a bush tomato, for instance, will produce maybe 50% leaves and about 50% flowers. But if you look at our hanging basket one, it's probably a higher proportion of flowers to leaves. So this will stay smaller than maybe their bush tomato. That's why I think the bush ones actually need a little bit of support. So you can see it's a much stronger stem, so it's grown much taller before it flowered. But again, none of these need side shooting. You can just leave them to their own devices and just let them grow. So this is our indeterminate or cordon tomato again. This is your traditional type, tall and thin. And the reason was it was supposed to be grown in rows in greenhouses, so you needed to control the growth. So it would be very difficult to grow a bush tomato in a greenhouse because it just grows bigger and wider. With a tall, thin tomato, you can make use of the height of the greenhouse, so it'll grow tall and thin, and you can get more plants in. So that's the reason that people still grow traditional type tomatoes. So these are indeterminate. I like to think of them as indecisive. So they can't really make up their mind whether to grow lots of leaves or some flowers. And really, you need to help them make up their mind by removing the side shoots. So that's the reason we side shoot these tomatoes. So this is what it probably should look like. And as before, this is what it tends to end up looking like. So it has a flower here, but it has about 7 or 8 huge side shoots. And these really need to come off. So we'll show you how. So I'll show you how to trim our unruly plant back to make it look a bit like this one. So you just want one stem. The thing is, the side shoots appear between every leaf and stem. So that is what happened to this one, is the side shoots have been left and they've just grown really fast. Thing is, you can do side shoots just with your fingers. I should say tomato plants are incredibly mucky. The whole idea of green fingers, you'll soon find out when you start trimming your tomato plant. The sap and the stickiness on the leaves will leave your hands incredibly green, and it's quite difficult to get off. So it is worth using a pair of gloves. There are different ways of taking them off. You can't just nip them off with your fingers. Secateurs for bigger shoots, or scissors. Scissors tend to crush a little bit, and secateurs are quite difficult to get into the plant. So our weapon of choice is a little craft knife. But anything sharp will do. The thing is, you should start at the top of your plant, work your way down. The reason is that if you accidentally knock the top off, you can leave another side shoot to grow. If you start at the bottom and work your way up, and you get to the top and then accidentally take the top off, you've lost all of the shoots, and you'll have to wait for another one to grow. So generally speaking, you work from the top down. So we're going to work from the top down. What I'm going to do, and you shouldn't really do this, is I'm going to remove a few of the leaves so you can see where we are with the plant. So I'm just going to take a few of the leaves off so it'll make it a bit easier to see. Because this plant has done what quite a lot do. And that it's got one very massive side shoot just below the truss. And this is what you'll often find with tomato plants, is that underneath the flowering truss, which is this bit here, one massive shoot will grow. It's very tempting to try and bend that off and break it with your hand, but it'll tend to just tear and run down the stem. So the best thing is to use a little knife or a craft knife and cut it off. So that's what you're removing. So this is a side shoot. Quite often on the internet they call them suckers, because in America they must call them suckers. If you wanted a really quick tomato plant, this is just a cutting. You can put that in water and it'll root and you'll have another tomato plant almost immediately. So now you'll see that at the very top there's a very, very tiny little side shoot between the next truss and here. And that is easy to get out of your fingers, so you can just pick it out and you end up with a very tiny shoot. So that tiny little shoot has gone to that big shoot really, really quickly. So get in the habit of side shooting your plants every week and taking these tiny little shoots out. So you can't really get confused. Between every leaf and stem there'll be a little shoot will appear, and the one underneath the truss is always the fastest growing one. So now we're working our way down the plant. We know we haven't broken the top, so now we can take all of the side shoots, and as we get lower down they'll get thicker and thicker. So again, this one's about a knife size. It's very tempting to try and pull them sideways, but as I say, it just tends to run down the stem. So this one here, this tiny one here, you could probably get with your fingers. So we'll try it. Yeah, so that would snap off. So that's about the limit, I think, that you should go with just with your fingers. Anything and above, try using a knife or scissors. It's worth saying that if this plant's got a virus or a disease, that knife will carry it to the next plant. So get in the habit of doing one tomato plant and then just cleaning this in some detergent or bleach or some alcohol just to prevent any disease moving from plant to plant. As you get lower down, they get a little bit bigger nearer the ground, but these still need to come off. Right, so that's our plant back to normal again. Remember, I took this leaf off just to show you how it grew, the big one underneath. So it should look like that, just a single stem. You've got one flower truss just developing, another one starting here, and then it'll just keep on growing flower trusses as it grows up. If you don't take the side shoots off, a lot of the growth and the energy in the plant will just go into producing more side shoots, and it won't go into making the fruit. So do I need to side shoot my tomato plants? Yes, if you want them to grow upright in a greenhouse and get some height and grow them up a cane or a string, you want to control them so that they grow nice and neat. So if you have a row of tomato plants, you would probably have to side shoot them. What would happen if I didn't side shoot my tomato plant? Well, you'd end up with a massive unruly bush, but it would still produce tomatoes. And they would be maybe a little bit late fruiting because they're putting all the energy into growth. But if you want to grow them in a greenhouse in a row, you don't need to side shoot, you need to control the growth. And what you want to do is make all of the energy of the plant go into the fruit. If you remember, we said that these indeterminate ones couldn't make up their mind whether to grow leaves or flowers. We have to help them produce more flowers. If you didn't bother to side shoot, what would happen? Well, we've grown a really bad tomato plant just to show you. So I didn't bother to side shoot my tomato plant. What will happen? Well, it'll end up a bit like this. A bit like a massive bush with no central leader and just lots and lots of massive side shoots. The thing with the cordon ones, or the indeterminate ones, is you've got to control the growth. You've got to encourage them to produce more flowers and more fruit than growth. So that's why we take the side shoots off. So this is what will happen if you don't do any side shooting. It'll just grow a bit unruly. But we will show you how you can trim this back into shape. So we've tidied up our scruffy tomato, taken all of the side shoots off, all the way up. So now we have one main stem, and just truss, 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 and truss. So now's a good time to mention how many trusses should you take off your tomato plant. So how many trusses should you aim for? Well, if you planted in April, you might look at 6, 7 or 8 trusses. If you're planting in May, you probably want to look at 5 or 6. So on this plant, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trusses. Bear in mind that it'll probably take about a month for this to flower, form fruit and ripen. So our 6th truss, which will appear here, is probably about the last one we're going to aim for. So we need to think about stopping our plant. So you usually stop it 1 leaf past the flower truss. So if the flower truss is here, we use 1 leaf and then stop the plant. What about leaves? Quite often people suggest you take the leaves off your tomato plant to make them ripen faster. Surely that doesn't make sense. Surely the plant needs leaves. The thing is, the leaves at the bottom have pretty much done all of their work, and it's the leaves at the top that we want. So it doesn't do any harm to remove some leaves. One reason is to allow more air through your tomato plants, so no humidity builds up and diseases break out. So it can be quite useful to take the leaves off from the bottom of the plant. Another thing is, removing the leaves can ripen the tomatoes a bit faster. Trials have proved that if sunlight can hit the fruit, it will ripen faster. So the sunlight acting on the actual fruit will make them sweeter and ripen them faster. So just by removing some leaves around your fruit trusses, you could actually make them ripen quicker. And then as your plant gets higher and higher up, you can take a few more leaves off. So what we normally suggest is, as each truss ripens, just take the leaves off up to that point. All the new leaves at the top are doing all the work, so you don't need to worry about losing a few of the older leaves. If you've never grown cordon tomatoes before, the one thing you do need to do is support them. If you're growing a hanging basket tomato, it needs no support. If you're growing a bush tomato, it just needs a few canes. They never grow as tall. But these cordon tomatoes can grow up to about 6 foot high, so they need some form of support. Normally, you would wind a string around them and tie them to the top of your greenhouse. But the tomato plant with a lot of fruit on it is really quite heavy. So you need to make sure your greenhouse can take the strain, or the clip that you clip it to is strong enough to take the weight. Another way is just to use a really strong cane to support the stem all the way up. It is important that you support the stem because the weight of the fruit would bring it down and actually break your tomato plant. So what we need to do is just make sure that this main stem is supported all the way up.